Just a few years ago, Clemson football was on top of the world. They had just produced back-to-back star quarterbacks in Deshaun Watson and Trevor Lawrence. Dabo Swinney was seen as one of the top coaches in college football, and it looked like the future was extremely bright for them. They were the next dynasty, some thought they could be even better than Bama, and Clemson could do no wrong. Now as we flash forward a couple of years, Clemson has fallen on hard times. Not only did they have somewhat of a fall off in 2021, but neither 2022 or 2023 got any better. This was leading many to wonder if Clemson's dynasty was falling apart, and in 2024, Dabo was going to be given one more shot. He could perform and get them to the college football playoff, and people would be off his tail. Or he could end up falling apart completely and showing that he was outdated and that they would eventually have to move on. Well, if week 1 has showed us anything so far, it's that it's probably trending in the second direction. Dabo Swinney's Clemson Tigers just got beat badly by Georgia. I mean, it wasn't even close. Georgia did whatever they wanted to Clemson in the second half, they controlled the whole game, played with much more swagger, and Clemson's offense was completely lost for seemingly the third straight year. Cade Klubnik did not look any better than he did last season, the offense looked completely confused on pretty much every single play, and outside of Phil Maffa and Antonio Williams, there really weren't any bright spots on this offense. That's at least from week 1. Georgia, on the other hand, played with complete swagger. Carson Beck knew exactly what he was doing, they got pretty much everyone on offense involved, they made great adjustments, and they ultimately dominated and could have put up even more points. The final score was 34-3 in Georgia's favor, and the number 1 Bulldogs proved why they are the best team in college football and why they could be the next dynasty in college football. Clemson is now old news, and in today's video, I want to talk about the Tigers and I also want to talk about this game. We're going to go through what the heck has happened to Clemson over the last couple of years, why things are extremely concerning after week 1, and then ultimately my thoughts and reactions on this game. Plus, we're also going to go through how I think Clemson will do the rest of the year, and why the horizon may not look much better for them. But before we get started, if you're a huge fan of college football, we are now into the 2024 college football season, so quickly be sure to take a moment to subscribe to the channel, leave a like if you want to support today's video, and let me know what player, team, topic, or situation I can cover next. Now let's get started and talk about Clemson football. But how did we get to this point? Well, for a long time, Clemson was seen as a program that could not get over the hump. That was until Dabo Swinney really started building things in the early 2010s. He ended up going 10-4 in 2011, and then over the next 10 years, they would win over 10 games. Sadly though, in that first stretch of the 2010s, they couldn't get over the hump either. They went 10-4, 11-2, 11-2, and 10-3, and that was at quarterback Taj Boyd. Luckily, going into the 2015 season, they would have Deshaun Watson as their star quarterback. He was a 5-star recruit in high school and ended up leading them to the national championship game where they lost. Luckily, 1 year later, Watson would come back, lead them to 14 wins, and then they would win the national championship game. In 2017, they had Kelly Bryant for 1 year before Trevor Lawrence would step in 2018. He ended up leading them to a 15-0 record and a win in the national championship game. Then over the next 2 years, we saw Clemson fall off a little bit. They did go 14-1, but then lost in the national championship game in 2019, and then in 2020, they ended up losing in the Sugar Bowl. This was the start of Clemson's downfall, but in 2021, they had their next 5-star quarterback. DJ Uiagalelei came from St. John Bosco High School, and he was just as highly recruited as both Deshaun Watson and Trevor Lawrence. It looked like things were going to continue on as usual, but DJ struggled. Clemson ended up going 10-3, and that was a very disappointing season for them. But many thought it'd just be a 1-year fluke. In 2022, DJ would be back once again, but things didn't get much better. They ended up going 11-3 and then lost in the Orange Bowl. This was now 2 straight years in which Clemson had missed the college football playoff, and fans were ready to run DJ out of town. He'd end up transferring to Oregon State for the 2023 season, but luckily, they had another 5-star. Cade Klubnik was arguably the number 1 quarterback in his class, and he would step in that bowl game, and then he would start the 2023 season. Last season, though, in 2023, they had their worst season since 2010. They ended up going 9-4 with a 4-4 mark in the conference before they'd win the Gator Bowl. Cade Klubnik was not really all that good, but many blamed him being new and the receivers being unhealthy as a reason why Clemson couldn't get it going. There's also many people pointing fingers at Dabo Swinney and his inability to adapt to the new college football world. He didn't really like the transfer portal, and he's been trying to do things his own way. Going into 2024, he was kind of on the hot seat. Honestly, I don't really know who is and who isn't on the hot seat, but according to the media and according to the world, Dabo Swinney needed to prove it. His first game would come against Georgia this season, and honestly, in my opinion, this was the biggest game he's had in years. How did Clemson end up doing? Well, let's just say it didn't go all too well. So going into this game, this was going to be the matchup of the noon slot. There was a lot of people who expected Georgia to win this game, but there was also a vocal minority of people who thought that Clemson was going to step up and match Georgia. Georgia was coming off a season in which they only lost one game, where they lost unluckily to Alabama in the SEC Championship game, and then absolutely spit-roasted Florida State. They returned their Heisman quarterback Carson Beck, and while they lost some talent in both the running back and receiver room, they brought in a ton of talented weapons through the portal and through high school recruiting to hopefully fill that void. Georgia ended up being favored by 13.5 points, and the over-under was 48.5. I myself definitely was going to pick Georgia, but there was also some question marks. Their star running back Trevor Etienne was going to be suspended for the opening game, and a lot of people were wondering what the heck Georgia was going to do. As I said, they lost a ton of weapons. Clemson, on the other hand, returned Cade Klubnik for their second straight year, and they also lost a decent amount of weapons. They lost their superstar corner Nate Wiggins to the NFL, and then also lost their superstar running back Will Shipley to the NFL. Players were going to have to step up, and one guy who did was Phil Maffa. He ended up running the ball 16 times for 59 yards in this game, and while that honestly isn't going to pop off the page, he was by far the best weapon Clemson had tonight. He was the only guy who could get anything going, and it seemed like they overworked it to death. Cade Klubnik ended up going 18 of 29 for 142 yards and threw an interception to Malachi Starks. That felt like that Oregon interception he had as a true freshman. In the receiving department, Antonio Williams caught the ball 6 times for 76 yards, and then Jake Bringingstool ended up having 3 catches for 26 yards. Tyler Brown also had 3 catches. Clemson's offense was absolutely terrible. They had 13 first downs, went 4 of 13 on third down, 0 of 1 on fourth down, and only averaged 4.9 yards per pass. They ended up averaging 2 yards per rush, and despite only having 1 turnover and 3 penalties, this game was an absolute blowout. As I said earlier in the game, it was somewhat competitive, as Georgia did not score until the second quarter, where eventually Peyton Woodring had 2 field goals. In the third quarter, though, Georgia ended up adapting and opened up the playbook. Carson Beck ended up finding Colby Young for a 7-yard touchdown on a fade route, and he was probably super happy he transferred from Miami. After that, Clemson would find their way down the field, where Nolan Hauser would hit a 26-yard field goal. It was 13-3, and they were still within striking distance. After that, though, true freshman Nate Frazier showed that he's going to be a guy of the future, as he ended up helping them a ton on that drive, and then finished with a 1-yard touchdown run. In the fourth quarter, Georgia continued their stout defense, and then London Humphreys, a transfer from Vanderbilt, had a 40-yard touchdown off of just a short completion, and then eventually their backup running back Cash Jones finished the deal with a 15-yard touchdown. Georgia would end up winning 34-3, and Clemson did absolutely nothing. Cade Klubnik had that infuriating interception to Starks. The running game really could never get going. No one really stepped up, and the defense eventually wore out. It looks like there are a ton of question marks for Clemson now. Garrett Riley still does not seem to know what he's doing at OC. The offense looks more lost than last year, and other than a couple of nice plays, Clemson for the most part was a dumpster fire on offense. Georgia, though, looked just as good as usual, as they just went crazy. Carson Beck would end up going 23 of 33 for 278 yards and 2 touchdowns, which was a very efficient night. Nate Frazier, the true freshman, ended up having 11 carries for 83 yards and a touchdown, and then in the receiving department, everybody got to eat. London Humphreys had 2 catches for 63 yards. Arian Smith led the way with 5 catches for 56 yards. Freshman tight end Lawson Lucky had 2 catches. Dominic Lovett had 3 catches. Dylan Bell had 4. And then both Colby Young, Cash Jones, and Branson Robinson also caught passes. Georgia did pretty much everything they wanted to. And then on the defensive side of the ball, Jalen Walker led the way with 6 tackles and 1.5 sacks. And Raylan Wilson made a couple of big hits. And obviously Malachi Starks had that crazy interception. Overall, it was an A-plus effort from Georgia. And while they did get off to a slow start, things ended up going their way. Clemson, on the other hand, pretty much gets an F. They're only able to muster up 3 points and got absolutely curb stomped on national television, showing head coach Dabo Swinney that he's going to be in for a long season. So where does Clemson go from here? While they're not going to be playing Georgia the next 2 weeks, they do play 2 tricky teams. Appalachian State will come into Death Valley next Saturday, and they have been known for picking off Power 5 opponents. Texas A&M, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Michigan all come to mind, and App State returns a star quarterback, and they also were pretty solid last year. I think Clemson's going to struggle with them, and if things don't change, they could actually lose. After that, they play NC State, who is currently ranked, but after they struggled with Western Carolina, I think Clemson's probably the better team there. After that, they play Stanford, which in my opinion will be a win, and then they go on the road to play Florida State. I have no idea what to expect of this Florida State team, but we'll find out more on Monday. Looking at the rest of the schedule, I still think Clemson gets to at least 9 wins. While many people are going to hit the panic button in week 1, I do think Clemson will adjust, and their schedule really isn't that difficult. They get Wake Forest, Virginia, Pittsburgh, and the Citadel on their roster. They get South Carolina out of the SEC, who's expected to have a down year. And then Virginia Tech just screwed themselves over with that loss to Vanderbilt. Florida State looked awful, and NC State did too. The ACC looks like it's going to have a terrible season, and they're already putting their whole hopes on Miami. Still though, Clemson is currently a dead football program. This officially pushes them out of that tier 1 or maybe even tier 2 of college football teams right now, and they have just proven that you have to adapt or else you're just going to get left behind. Clemson's in big trouble right now, but luckily they could be bailed out by a pretty easy schedule. Still though, there are plenty of problems with this team, and if they don't figure it out soon, they could end up losing to pretty much any team on this schedule. We'll just have to wait and see, but what do you guys think? If you're a Clemson fan, what do you think of today's performance? What the heck has gone wrong? And how do you even fix this mess? Be sure to let me know your thoughts down below, leave a like if you want to support today's video, subscribe if you're new, and check out all of the videos on the end screen. Hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.